everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast wherein a bunch of writers sit around drinking and talking about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Today's hosting committee is John Schmidt, Chaz and Karen Brinchley, and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 62, Tentacles with Nick Mamatas. Welcome, Nick. We're so glad you could join us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I have to start with an argument this time. And I know that'll go completely against everything you believe in. So yeah, bear with me. I actually knew your name before Chaz sent me your thing because in the same way that I knew John Scalzi wrote essays and such, but I didn't know he was an author at first until I met him in person. That's putting your foot in it. I have read some of your blogs and essays, and there was one in particular that was about House and Sherlock because I am both a House file and a Sherlock file. And I want to say, you're wrong. People freaking love House. That's how it got to 8 seasons.
Oh, sure. I love House, too.
Well,
and people love the show, but what I've been seeing, what I was responding to was this idea of people saying, oh, that House, he always breaks the rules. It's no fair. We're having these TV shows about jerks, and we should have TV shows about nice people.
Oh, and so I was going to say, people aren't hate watching him because hate watching is what we save for the New England Patriots or the Dallas Cowboys. Nobody hate watches House. And I think the truth is the way that he goes and says, he puts forth uncomfortable truths. Everybody lies. Ignoring the spiritual, ignoring the feeling thing, concentrate on the goal of solving the problem. And you caught all the pieces, and many of them that he was indeed Sherlock Holmes of the modern day. They are the male archetype ideal, and I entirely agree with you. And then I started to say, there's a reason that we don't have any gender-swapped Holmes-type characters out here in the West, is because I don't think a woman is allowed to be that unsympathetic in books or TV or movies. Discuss.
Well, first, I don't like House as a human being. I like the show, but it really jumped the shark when he and Scully, or whatever her name was, started getting together. and so, yeah, but Sherlock Holmes, but I know what you mean. I mean, it's pretty much, it's like the whole nasty women that the Cheeto goes on about.
We're not talking politics.
We're not talking politics, but it's be nice, behave yourself, dress pretty, smile, always being told to smile.
Yeah, Jeannie, your contention that you can't have a Sherlock Holmes character who is female is entirely refuted by the success of Laurie R. King's Mary Russell books.
Okay.
Who is she marries Sherlock Holmes, but she is exactly a Sherlock Holmes figure.
No, it's not what she can do. It's the interaction with others, that she is still feminine, though, that she has those feminine qualities, not the masculine.
Not so much.
She's not a girly girl.
No, she can pass herself off as a girly girl, just as she can pass herself off as a bloke. But she has, let's say she has the whole range of human achievement available to her.
You mean she's just like a man?
No, I was trying not to say that.
Okay.
Because that's not what I mean at all. There are times when Sherlock Holmes can be a woman, and trust me, his secret bolt holes in London are full of gowns.
I was nodding at that, yeah.
Right. Well, anyway, so I had to start with that argument with you just to lay it out there. But
TV and film, I think it's definitely the case that is challenging to have a woman protagonist who is not friendly, not warm, not sexy. Although I guess something like Atomic Blonde has some of that with Charlize Theron. But for books, there are just so many books out there. When you have 500,000 books a year, you're going to get a few that are going to come through. One that comes to my mind is Sarah Grant's Dope, which is one of my favorite crime novels. With a very Dope by Sarah Grant. That's Gran, if you're following me at home. And that is basically about a heroin addict detective who's an amateur sleuth who's also a heroin addict who's trying to find a missing woman. And, it's very dark noir, and it was a hit after a fashion, that's for sure. Sort of brought noir back in a lot of ways, that it wasn't 10 years ago now, that wasn't really being presented in major publications or in major presses before. So I think there are books like that definitely do have that kind of dark, dour, not sympathetic, not helpful, not empathetic character who nonetheless has some sort of mission that it is and they're driven for some reasons to do anything. But for film and TV, I definitely think it's more difficult to find something like that.
Well, the closest they've got is there has to be a great big flaw. Like we could present Jessica Jones on TV as being, she was pretty unlovable, at least through the first few episodes in there. Yeah. But she had to be broken. She couldn't just be driven professional on top of things, maybe a small addiction.
Yeah, trauma.
Yeah, there has to be a trauma that lets a woman be bitchy.
Yeah. Although, honestly, I didn't make it past the first episode of Jessica Jones because it was a 44-minute episode and 23 minutes of it is her on a fire escape looking across the street.
Yeah.
And all the Netflix shows are like that. All the Netflix originals are 8 episodes, stretched after 14 episodes with a lot of people just staring off to the side.
I think that's
art, darling.
That's dramatic art of the current century. Once upon a time, it was a black and white picture of a cigarette smoldering on an ashtray. I mean,
they're not just people pointing shins to the cameraman, the camera operator.
All right. Now, onward to Tentacles. You seem to love Tentacles, which is fair because I love Tentacles. And we all know that HP was pretty flawed, but the torch is beautifully being passed around, and I like some of the things you've done with it.
Yeah.
So explain more. Nick, tell us about your Tentacles.
Tell us about your tentacle love and fascination.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to avoid is the question of how did you first get started with H.P. Lovecraft? Because every answer is the same. Oh, I was a kid and I came across it. And so that's everyone's answer. You ask them, when did you get into science fiction? I was a child. When did you start writing? I was a child. Forget about all of that. Nobody ever says, I was just basically living in a cave and then a novel came to me and I wrote it down. But as far as why I decided to start writing Lovecraftian fiction, honestly, it was a pretty mercenary decision. I was hanging around in St. Mark's Bookshop, the now defunct, but always legendary bookshop in East Village. And I was looking at the remainder table and I saw a book of letters from Lovecraft. And also related to that, next to it was a book of letters from Kerouac. And I thought, wow, people even read these guys' letters? They must be read anything with these guys in it. I'll make a novel with both of them combined. And then all the Kerouac fans, all the Beats, and all the Lovecraftians will read my stuff. And that was, of course, not the case. So, only the intersection of the two groups read my stuff.
Do we call it?
Was this weird cult.
Is it a pastiche? Is it an homage? Or is it unashamed fanfic? Because I'm good with any of them. The combining of Lovecraft and Kerouac, a little bit of an homage in there, but, I think I love it. I love
Moving to Ground, the first novel, which was reissued recently by Dover Publication, is more of a pastiche of Kerouac. It's Kerouac as the main character, and it's sufficiently in his voice that someone who is a scholar of the Beats, who is the spouse of a fairly prominent weird fiction writer, looked over her husband's shoulder and said, what Kerouac is this?
Oh, wow.
That was...
Yes, that's cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah. But the themes are Lovecraftian themes and the settings of Lovecraftian America. And it is not fanfic. I guess you have to be a fan of something. And I'm somewhat of a fan, but there's also a critique and a subversion. And, of course, everyone subverts everything these days, and everyone critiques everything these days. But books are made out of other books. And so...
I think it's interesting that a certain way anybody can write about vampires without referring to Stoker, but it's super hard to write about, tentacled creatures from other worlds without referring to Lovecraft directly. And is it a little bit newer, or what do we think? Is it because it's so unique?
He sketched out the archetype for the old gods. You can write about standard tentacle horrors, and a number of other tentacle horrors exist, like Walktopi and the Chaosium novels, et cetera, but those are very definitely the great old one. That's Lovecraft. Yeah,
whereas, Cthulhu is a thing, and Dracula, if you say Dracula, it's certainly Stoker. But if you just say vampires, there have been vampires everywhere, and there's tons of mythology all over the planet for tentacled creatures of the deep.
Well, the thing is, so there's, tentacled creatures of the deep. The first vision I saw was the Disney version of what's the guy who had the underwater shell thing, and they had
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea?
Yes, that one. And then and hacking at tentacles that were attacking them and things. I mean, tentacles, I think of them as a sea thing, not so much as an on land tentacles thing. But then I'm not as tentacle expert as you tentacle experts are. But I would think actually Kerouac would be, I mean, kind of bringing Kerouac into the kind of science fiction horror mythos would actually be pretty cool. Now, I apologize for not read that book. Now I'm going to have to. Because I think that would be very interesting because it's not done, and the Beats were trying to build their own new thing, and I think jumping them forward and seeing what they would make in a Brave New World. I don't know, but anyway, I think that's actually very interesting.
Yeah. So the tentacular, the tentacle, the tentacle comes from both the sea and the sky, like the cosmic version that's coming from the sky. Because the sky is kind of like the sea. It's void, it's endless, it's full of mysterious things. We don't really have a lot of access to it. In the same way, we don't really have a lot of access to the sea, which is,
It's a spaceship. It's exactly the same. You have it right. Ether ships from the 19th century sailing from here to Mars. Thanks, Chaz. Think of it. They were still, space was considered a kind of ocean. It was just the next sort of ocean. So the tentacles from the deep and from the beyond and from deep in space makes perfect sense.
Yeah, but the other thing about this, though, is that with tentacled creatures from the deep, we don't have a shorthand for that. I mean, that's why Stoker managed to dig so deep, because he could say vampire. We don't have a vampire word for massive, weird, tentacled monsters.
I tell you that we do, and they play hockey, and they're the Kraken.
Oh, that's right.
We do have a Kraken. I allow you the Kraken. Or
Nick, how do I say that properly in Greek? Kraken or Kraken?
Yeah. Depends on ancient Greek or modern Greek, but Kraken is fine. But also recall that one thing that was very popular in my lifetime was the movie Clash of the Titans, where the Kraken is not a tentacle creature. Right. And but I think the question is really this. I think, I even made the same point some years ago in an interview. I said, we don't call vampire fiction Stokerism because vampires are very large, but I think it's a process. I think it's a process of weird fiction, which isn't just about tentacles, but it's about the vibe and the cosmic pessimism and the scale that Lovecraft was a major factor in, but not the only author of, is now becoming post-Lovecraftian while also being reminiscent of Lovecraft. But surely, if you can imagine just some years after Stoker's Dracula, of course, there were always these vampire films, and they were always Eastern Europeans who were noble, and they were fine with sex and death. And now then we had the vampire's point of view with Anne Rice. Now we have comical vampires and vampires as superheroes and vampires as this. And I think that process is happening with Lovecraftian or post-Lovecraftian weird fiction too. It just hasn't happened yet, partially because I don't know if it fits the novel as easily as a vampire does. And I've written Lovecraftian novels. People have. A lot of them tend to be pretty short or tend to only use weird fiction as flavoring for what's otherwise a straightforward supernatural thriller.
See, now I think your sequel has to be The Motorcycle Diary and the Biarchy. And, fear and loathing in Las Vegas and beyond.
Well, I wrote that too, actually. I wrote a book with my friend Brian Keene with Hunter S. Thompson versus Cthulhu, essentially.
I was going to say, it goes right for Hunter there.
Yeah. And both Kerouac and the Beats generally, like William S. Burroughs and Hunter S. Thompson, were phantasmagorical while being realistic. They found the phantasmagorical in journalism, essentially, in autofiction. And so that's why the voice, I thought, was very good for appropriating to talk about Lovecraftian themes.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So have you read China Miéville's Kraken?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I enjoyed that.
So what did you think?
I reviewed it some years ago for Sci-Fi Wire. I liked it a lot. It was actually, it was a lot of fun. And I also thought that it was probably 50% incomprehensible to anyone who's not a member of the far left.
Yeah,
that is kind of the nature of China.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much.
But it's a novel about fantasy and magic and crazy things, but it's also a novel about sectarianism.
Yes.
These micro religions or these micro Trotskyist groups and Maoist groups that. So the funny part of Kraken is that the main cult is of these sort of, worshippers who are trying to bring about some kind of end of the world or some kind of apocalypse are essentially the Anglicans of the society. They're the normal straight-laced ones, and the weirder
Mayans.
ones.
Let's be fair. They could be Mayans. There was a beautiful, end of the world coming. It's right there in cuneiform. So.
Well, Miebel's writing in a sort of British idiom,
Right.
and so he's thinking, who are the straight-laced, almost state-backed religious force versus all these sort of little nuts.
Yeah.
So the Anglicans are also the Labour Party, and they're also all these people trying to enter the Labour Party and withdraw activists from it. So you to really get 100% of the book, you really need to spend some time on a Sunday morning trying to sell a newspaper to who nobody cares about, like the Workers' Vanguard or that.
Yeah, but everybody's done that. Everybody's done that, surely.
I was going to say, I have a strange beginning with Lovecraft, and it wasn't Lovecraft at all. So I knew the rhyme, strange is the night where the black stars rise, and stranger moons circle this through the skies, but stranger still is lost Carcosa, because by God, I read a lot of Darkover.
Okay.
Literally, it was MZB who led me to say, I was asked, because somebody else made a joke about this, but Lovecraft, like, what? And I was in high school, and I had to go to a library the old-fashioned way, with lacking the interwebs, to go and say, what is this? You mean she didn't just make this up? So I love other authors using it and making it their own.
And that's what, I'm guessing I have to confess that, yes, I was a child when I found out about this. And I found out about it from the Ghostbusters cartoon.
Awesome.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which had a Cthulhu episode, they call it Cat Cthulhu for trademark reasons. And they were just talking about it, the Necronomicon and Cthulhu and that kind of thing. And one of the characters says, "Oh, we can't read the Necronomicon, but we can read H.P. Lovecraft. He's okay." And I was just sitting there eating cereal, where I'm going, "Oh, that sounds real. That sounds like a real thing someone is telling me to check out."
Cool.
And soon you'll be writing cultist sea shanties and singing them with the rest of us around a fire.
Exactly.
So you started your life in film, really. Here's a question. Do you imagine you're writing in imagery first or in news or in words first? Do you kind of see the whole pictures in your head when you're writing out the thing, or are you more beguiled by the written word?
More voice. So I spend a lot of time on point of view. Usually when I'm writing, I shuffle through various perspectives and points of view. Should this be in the first person? Should it be in the second? Should it be third objective? Should it be third subjective? Should it be omniscient? Should it be sort of ossified first, as in a journal or a letter? And when I get that point of view right, because once you make a point of view decision, many other decisions are made for you.
Sure. Does that mean that you try several of these with each new project until the voice sounds right?
Sometimes via pre-composition in my mind, and sometimes certainly right after my child was born, I was distracted. And so in 2013, 2014, I have a lot of first 1,000 words for various stories and different points of view, and then it takes a while to get it. But since then, now that he's 6, I'm back to normal. And I usually do the pre-composition where I just think. When I hear that first sentence that sounds right, or that first paragraph that sounds right in my mind, then I can run through an entire draft, more or less.
I was just hit with now we are 6 with tentacles.
You can do that one.
Okay, I will.
So
There's not much that rhymes with tentacle.
I was going to say, so do you feel like you have sort of the story in your head or the plot in your head, or I guess this is more for short stories, then you sort of imagine the whole image in one, right?
I imagine it's sort of the start, like the top of the roller coaster.
Right.
And I don't know where the rest of the roller coaster is, or like the cliche of you're driving at night. And I don't drive, so I hear when you drive at night, it's hard to see. And you can only see the headlights ahead of you. So, but once I know which direction I'm on, which road I'm on, and I can drive in that direction, then I go through to the end. And honestly, a lot of my short fiction isn't much in the way of plot. A lot of them are written like confessions of a first-person narrator, or objects, like written objects like a blog post or a listicle in fiction form. But more recently, I've been working with novelettes and things like that as more of a plot. And even then, I'll just break through and change point of view to have a direct address to the reader and that kind of thing. So no, I don't conceive of the plot as a line, but I conceive of the voice and the character. And then what happens to the character, what the character says in response to what's happening or response to their own actions, sort of makes the decisions for me.
So
when I'm teaching, I definitely teach. I teach straight text triangle. I teach plot points. I teach reversal of fortune. When I write, I don't do any of those things. So I teach as an editor. like I teach in an editorial way, as a prescriptive editorial way, but I write very differently than I.
Do you enjoy teaching?
I love teaching. I really enjoy it, and I really miss it because we're now in the middle of a plague.
Yeah.
And I really like teaching in person. Just small groups of 5 or 6 or 7.
Yeah. And
I like online teaching as well, but it's much more time consuming.
Well, I've actually had friends who've taken your class and they give you, A++ thumbs up as a teacher. So
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
So do you view this, eventual breakdown as being a dystopian inevitability, or are we just going to welcome our new tentacled overlords when they come?
I'm actually pretty optimistic. I think the virus has great radical plans for the world, and they're carrying them out, and it can't be resisted. So,
Excellent.
So if you want to get rid of the virus, there's no way around it. We're going to have to change for the better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's kind of like the Black Death, which was much more deadly. Killed half of Europe, but then it also eliminated feudalism.
Yeah.
So
and we'll see what this virus eliminates. That's distasteful.
Have you established, is there a Nick Mamatas trope, or do you have readers that are going to show up and buy your books expecting your traditional tentacle art town? Are you going to surprise us with by the skin of our teeth later? Or
to a certain extent, people have said, "Oh, every one of your books is different," but almost all of my books are kind of the same thematically, in that it's usually a woebegone, very smart but not that smart person being tossed around in the first person by some terrible events, whether they're tentacular or Lovecraftian, or spiders that are intelligent collectively, and my novel, I'm working on 2 novels now, one of which is under contract, so I've got to actually do it, which is The Word, which is a speculative thriller called The Second Shooter. And it is about a person writing a book about mass shooting events and how so many of them start with the idea of a second shooter that's there that ends up being false. That, the original stories are coming out of a newspaper article, or they're witnessing, I saw 2 guys with machine guns. And it ends up being 1 guy. And where are all these second shooters going? Where are they just... Is it eyewitness, or are they something real behind it? And of course, it's a science fiction novel, so there is something behind it. And the other one I'm working on is a post-singularity version of The Tempest, with from the point of view of the Caliban character, the only human in a very small world of post-humans who are essentially wizards, given their post-human digital implants and that kind of thing. So things get different, but it's always like someone who's kind of looking for something, and something gigantic appears thematically, ideologically, supernaturally, and how they deal with that.
So those both sound really good. Do you have any sort of idea of when people can read them? Do they have,
Well, The Second Shooter is supposed to come out from Solaris Books in November 2021.
Okay.
What I suppose is depending on me finishing the book by November 2020. So maybe 2022 is a possibility. We'll see what happens.
how are you finding writing in this time of the pandemic? Is it easier or harder for you?
It was harder. Now it's become easier. Honestly, I had a very hard time, as many people did, with the pandemic. But I moved to California in 2008, and I got my first ever office job, which lasted 11 years, and we ended the job in 2019, and that was a very rough time for a variety of reasons. But I was used to being home a lot and being alone a lot in the years before I moved to California. So I sort of snapped to it, and I wrote the first 20,000 words of the Tempest novel, which is on submission now to various publishers who will see. I mean, it's August, so everyone's in the Hamptons getting COVID.
Yeah.
But when the survivors crawl back to their offices in September, I'm hoping that someone will buy this book. And The Second Shooter I worked on in 2016. I haven't looked at it in years. It just happened to be floating around, and I changed agents. And it was purchased by Solaris in February of this year, right before the virus hit the United States. So it was very lucky happenstance that I got my advance check the day I was laid off from the bookstore where I've been working.
Great.
Very nice.
So everybody was freaking out, like, oh, here's a big check for me. And I also got the check for my anthology, my Lovecraft anthology, Wonder and Glory Forever, on that same day. So I was like sort of cruising for a while, and I wrote 20,000 words of the Calabas novel, the Tempest novel. I'm now writing 26,000 words of the other novel, The Second Shooter, so that's going pretty well. I moved my coffee table out of my living room, put it in the bedroom, so now I do Tai Chi and yoga every day.
So I was going to say, tell me about your routine. That how did it work for you to settle down? We've had a lot of people that write in that say, how do you do it? How do you be creative? I've got nothing. Give us a routine, a day in the life of Nick.
I wake up around 7:45. Well, I wake up around 6. Look at my phone to make sure no one has died of COVID that I know over the night. Go back to sleep. Wake up at 7:45. Say hello to a couple of friends. Drink water. Drink some magic pills I get in the mail that are supposed to reverse aging. But it's more like a placebo, but it works for mine because it makes your mind go. I do some power yoga. I look at my social media and email. I faff around a bit.
Do you find yourself having to limit social media right now? And there's a lot of people are discovering that it's a big, yeah.
Nope, I've had my face in the fire hose of social media for a very long time.
Okay.
I will say I post less and I get into fights less, but I consume just as much as always.
Okay, why do you
I'll do some writing or do some other work. Sorry?
Why do you get into fights less? This is not the Nick we know and love.
Getting old, wanting to get other things going on, trying to be nicer in general,
Okay. Interesting theory.
It's noble. What tools do you use? Are you a scrivener? We have a scrivener, let's just call him cultist, that talks about the greatest, or do you write it out longhand? What's your path?
I just use Word and type it through.
Cool.
And it wasn't until my 2 novels go I realized I could change the name of my file. So now I do name of the book 10K for the first 10,000 words. Then I add 1,000 words. Okay, now it's 11K. But before that, I was always fucking around with versions and making mistakes and losing thousands of words. But I basically use Word as a typewriter. I just beginning to end, and then I go back over it a little bit and have somebody read it for me, like a friend or someone who was invested in the success, to point out, where I leave things out. And I'm a leaver-outer, and I write short novels. My longest novel's been 75,000 words, which is not...
That's barely a novel at all, you wimp.
Exactly.
Hey, we're not being mean here, Chaz.
I'm being
Honestly, most of my novels are 10 short stories in a row about the same person.
I love that. Well, Nick, if you're sitting around with a novel you want someone to read, you have my email address.
Absolutely. In fact, Chaz and Karen wrote a novella for me over a weekend. And it was
good.
Experience. Yeah. So that's coming out in January.
Huh. And although it's like, Nick wrote this, did he? That's really, really good. But kind of on the tentacle side of, interesting kind of thing. It was actually really good. So yeah.
So for those who might be curious about the name of that novella, it's called The Planet Breaker Sun, and it's coming out in a small sort of chapbook style collection, also called The Planet Breaker Sun, in January from PM Press, which is an anarchist publisher, also local today. And it's a series of what's called outspoken authors, edited by Terry Bisson. And it's basically been friends of Terry, and now they're moving on to people Terry kind of knows.
Oh, okay. It'd be awesome if there was eventually an Enemies of Terry.
That's right.
The thing
Wouldn't that be fun?
So I must jump in here. Terry Bisson is a friend of mine. He and I were the ones who founded SF and SF. So I've known him for 20 odd years, although I haven't seen him as much lately because I haven't been able to go to SF as an SF. But I really love his passion. Okay, I love his passion for left-wing things, and I love his what's the title of his press you said a minute ago, but I love what he's doing with that. I think I'm very pleased.
It's a fascinating thing, and I'm proud to be a part of it, the Outspoken Authors series. But I just don't know Terry that well, so I wouldn't call him a friend. He's a friendly acquaintance, but I love his stuff. I love his stuff since I was a kid. I wasn't throwing shade on Terry, but it is interesting to be like the young guy. Oh, you're the young writer in this group, because I'm 58.
So give us, you actually wrote, not only have been writing and teaching and all of these things, but you wrote a writing guide, Starve Better, Surviving the Endless Horror of the Writing Life. Mm-hmm. Tell me about it. What is the theory of it? How do you survive?
Well, a lot of writing books deal with book-length materials, which if you're starving doesn't help. Because step 1, write a novel, that might take 2 years. Step 2, get an agent, that might take a year. Step 3, sell that book, that might take a year. So you've already been starved to death, 7 times over. So Starve Better is about writing in short subjects, both short fiction and short nonfiction, like feature reporting, interviews, service journalism, that kind of stuff. with the idea being, and so I give some tips on how to write short fiction effectively, especially for science fiction and fantasy, and some tips about how to be a freelance writer of, feature articles. Like, 'cause I did a lot of sort of journalism and essays and things like that in the Ills for the Village Voice, for business magazines, technical magazines, art magazines, and I still dabble occasionally, but now, of course, the bottom has fallen out of nonfiction. When I was writing in the early 2000s, even a schmuck like me who didn't want to leave his house to get $1 a word or 50 cents a word writing for a business magazine or doing an email interview with somebody. And now, of course, advertising fell apart and the web took over. So now if I get 25 cents a word, I'm thrilled, except it's been 20 years of inflation.
You got to consider IT security. I still get paid $1 a word.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, actually, Jeannie, if you need to hire someone, you got someone right here.
Excellent.
That's right.
He'd be good.
Yeah.
So also there's medium.com, which is another very public, anyone can post and you're paid by the number of people who read or something, but they keep jerking around the algorithm of how people get paid. So people keep getting paid less and less and less.
I'm shocked.
So, yeah, I know. I'm shocked by that. So
there was something around that about 20 years ago too. Like one of the original blog platforms had that kind of, we'll pay you a dime a view. We made a penny of you. We made another cent of you. I was reading a book by another friendly acquaintance, Jason Boog, the other day, which was about writers in the 30s and writers in the early 2000s. And he was one of these bloggers who was producing tons of content for this blog platform, the name of which I forget, for these pennies a word, and ended up cutting, not in half, but by 90% every time.
Yeah.
To the point where he was writing for free, but he kept writing for free just to act like he still had a job.
Okay.
oh,
So,
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, what's your best advice to a would-be best-selling author then? Should they try to write? You've written a lot of standalones. I couldn't find any series you've done. Is the series dead? Is it just getting started? What do you see?
Oh no, the series is huge, and I mean, one of my flaws as a writer, if your goal is writing to be a best-selling author, is that I don't write a series. I don't write 80,000, 90,000 word novels. I write the novels I am capable of writing. So I spent years squeezing in stories and squeezing in chapters while writing other things like journalism and also like writing term papers for students. I was a very successful term paper artist for a long time. And so I trained myself to write short and succinct in a way that is not necessarily the most commercial way of writing. But yeah, absolutely, the series is it. And it is
There's a piece of that. I think
me to make money because I don't write series and I don't care to. I mean, honestly, I don't even read many series. I read the first 2 books of so many trilogies. I'm like, I figured it out. I know how it's going to end.
Uh-oh.
Much less 10 books about the same person. I can barely read 2 stories about the same person. Give me something else every time. So my reading and writing interests are distinct. So my vision of making a living as a writer is writing many different sort of things as opposed to writing a series of novels that can continue and become a television show or that can continue for 14, 15 novels or that kind of business.
Although I presume if somebody wanted to turn, I saw there was a webcomic of you and I went through and had to read it. And if somebody threw their nasty old money at you to turn one of your novels into a series, I'm sure you wouldn't just say, no.
No, I'm happy to do it. And I've done a little dabbling in movies too. As you mentioned, I started off as a gaffer. And when I was working at Viz Media, I helped make a film called Edge of Tomorrow from one of our books, All You Need Is Kill. I wrote the original treatment for it. That was totally abandoned. The only thing that survived we just introduced the treatment as a concept. So would you mind terribly stopping and explaining to listeners what you mean by treatment? Sure. A film treatment is a summary of the story. So it could be 4 or 7 pages long. Often does not have any dialogue in it, but it just tells you the recitation of events of the story. So I took the novel All You Need Is Kill by Hiroshi Sakurazaka. I boiled it down to 4 pages so that someone's assistant's intern could read it and then translate it to a sentence. The sentence being, it's Groundhog Day, made Starship Troopers. And from then we were off to the races, and we got someone to write a script, and the script was great, and then it wasn't used because Tom Cruise got attached to it. So instead of being an 18-year-old Japanese guy, the hero was a 50-year-old American.
And you were the original treatment for that. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. And then the film was made, and the one thing that survived from my version, my treatment of it, and the treatment was just for me as an employee of Viz Media, not as a freelancer or a screenwriter, was one of the characters is called the Full Metal Bitch, but they didn't want to use that, so there's a scene where she walks out and everyone's going, "Oh, it's the Full Metal," and she punches the guy in the face before he says bitch. That's the only thing that I came up with that survived the different versions of the film script and the shooting and the editing.
Then,
Okay,
then
so
on behalf of our
seconds.
on behalf of our sound engineer, I have to thank you because he said he watched that movie and he's like, Tom Cruise dies 1,000 deaths. It's the happiest thing he'd ever seen because he doesn't like it. So on behalf of Dave Welsh, thank you.
You're welcome, Dave Welsh.
So Nick, when you're sitting around not doing yoga and have had your morning beverage and want to read something, who do you reach for? Who are you interested in reading?
Oh, I will say I've had a lot of trouble reading over the past year, but I've been getting back into it slowly but surely. And I've not been reading a ton of science fiction or fantasy, although I did recently read and love The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, which is a horror novel about 4 guys who live on a reservation, and they kill the wrong deer. Let's put it that way.
Oh, dear.
The first 100 pages or so are kind of, it's like a Stephen King novel, but with American Indians, with Native Americans in it. But then after that guy gets, who cares? We'll spoil it. After that guy gets killed on page 100, then it gets really good.
Okay.
Then the point of view shifts to the point of view of the antagonist.
Right.
We're seeing things through her eyes, the supernatural antagonist, and such a beautiful antagonist, and written in such a strange way that is both otherworldly and totally grounded in the human experience. It's really incredible. So I love that book a lot.
Excellent.
So do you consider yourself more of a horror writer or a science fiction writer or a mainstream writer? What, if you were to pigeonhole yourself, what would you do?
I'm just a writer. When I'm writing an essay, I'm an essayist. When I'm writing a horror novel or horror story, I'm a horror writer. When I'm writing science fiction, I'm a science fiction writer. When I'm writing crime or mystery, I'm a mystery writer.
Cool.
Which again is like the worst thing to do if you want a career or a reputation, but I don't care.
And the next
because why do people want to be writers? They want to be their own boss. They want to work at home and be their own boss. They don't want 50,000 bosses of the readers, or they don't want their agent to be the boss. They don't want their editor to be the boss. So to not have your agent be the boss or editor be the boss, you have to do a lot of different things. Yep. That way the power of the bossiness, of the authoritarianism of publishing, or of the reverse authoritarianism of the massive fans, the Nietzschean weak crowd taking over the strong author or whatever, are diluted by not having any fans.
So do you have a Patreon or something like that?
I have a little Patreon where I review books and films that I read. But honestly, it's a fun little Patreon, but I don't do it as much because I have been having trouble reading over the past year. But now I'm slowly, surely getting back into it. So I don't really care about. So yeah, you want to look at the Patreon, go right ahead. I only post 2 or 3 things there a month. But my main interest in sort of making money with books is editing them. So I have an anthology coming out and writing them.
That's The Wonder and Glory Forever, right? When is that going to come out?
That's right. So that's another Lovecraftian anthology of mostly recent reprints that explore an underexplored part of Lovecraftian fiction, which is the sublime.
Okay,
as
that makes
opposed
sense.
to the horrific or the humorous.
All right. Well, we will put links to these stories and, of course, naturally everything else we mentioned on the website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. You can also find us on Facebook or Twitter. We answer email. Nick, if somebody's got some questions for you and they write in, can we talk you into answering them?
Absolutely.
Beautiful. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre McGaffey-Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spider is David Welsh. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking a Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with the Morning Person, both by Michael Ingberg. You can hear more from Michael Ingberg on manyhatsmusic.com. Our podcast sponsor is Eternally Jackal Designs, enabling you all to wear WDC swag across your chest. And hey, thanks for listening.